Hey everyone, I've been working as a sales agent at a marketing firm, and I've been quite busy with that. And I'm also working on a business that I'm starting, and I'll show you guys the logo. And luckily, I've managed to play in some over-the-board tournaments lately. And I just wanted to share a game, that I played with an 1800 USCF rated player. And I like to enter the open tournaments, not because I'm likely to win, but it's because I can learn more from my games as a result. And so I usually play d4 simply because I don't know the e4 lines as thoroughly. So he plays knight to f6, remaining flexible, and I maintain my goal of controlling the center by playing c4. And I often like to plan a queenside attack in these types of positions. He played g6, King's Indian or Grunfeld land, and I play my knight out to c3, fighting for control of e4 and d5. So he plays d5 himself, and this is the Grunfeld. So instead of taking, I just play my knight out. He plays bishop to g7, and now that he played bishop to g7, I don't mind playing e3. The main reason's because my dark squared bishop doesn't really need to be out here in his face. There's nothing really productive to do. I could come to f4, but I really don't want him to open up his bishop by moving his knight while attacking my bishop. So I don't want to go down a bishop for knight in this kind of position. So anyways, that's basically my deeper thinking behind e3. And, I have no problem with getting my bishop to d2 or b2. He castles. I played bishop d3. It's a good move. And I know that now he can take on d4 and I'll have lost that tempo. But white's just better in that position anyway, positionally speaking. So he goes with something unique. He played c5 here. And so I had to stare at this position for a while. What line do I want to go with? White can either take here on c5, and, it's a gambit, it's a sacrifice, but it really opens up black's bishop. So I don't know if I really like that, so I just castled. And plus, if I did take on c5, then he takes, I take with my bishop, and I lost that tempo. And he has a nice target. He can bring his queen here. Maybe if I play pawn forward at any point, he could play a5. So these are just some things discouraging me from just winning a pawn. I castled. He takes my pawn on d4. I take with the knight now. Now, it wouldn't have been bad to take with the pawn, but I didn't like the idea of having an isolated queen's pawn against a better player. He was an 1800 rated player, and I'm still provisional. So I just took with the knight, and he takes on c4. Of course, I take with the bishop, and now I like white's position. I mean, I have 3 minor pieces out, active, and so he plays his knight out to d7. I didn't really like this move. I guess my c5 square is a little bit weak, but I play b4 now. And this is the novelty of the game. I really like it. It kind of asks black why he put his knight here. Is his plan really to go to e5 and encourage something like f4? So I don't know. I just don't think that this move has to be correct because it's blocking his queen off as well. And a lot of people think that knights on a file, it's still an open file, there's no pawn here. But, aside from the pawn, the knight is the least mobile piece. So when there is a knight blocking your queen or your bishop along a diagonal, that can be a problem for that trapped piece. At least short term, for 1 or 2 moves. So he could have played, I could have played b3 here. That's actually the book move. There were 2 other games played with b3 here on the master level. But my move was the novelty. So if I played b3, he could play something like knight e5. Then after bishop e2, White's bishop has the same purpose of keeping the knight out. Same purpose as it ended up having in the game the way I played, where I played b4, then he attacks the bishop, and I back the knight up. I mean the bishop up, so same idea, I'm keeping that knight out. So that's kind of interesting. And, you know, so I don't really like black's knight here on b6. It has no future, can't go anywhere. And it's blocking the b pawn off, and it's going to accelerate my queenside attack if I get that started. So he plays e5, kicking the knight. Knight backs up. Now there's some tactical ideas of eventually playing e4 with opening up the long diagonal, so keep that in mind. He plays queen e7, correctly by the way. Just immediately playing the pawn forward would be a mistake, because then if I back my knight up, the pawn has too much pressure on it. So after queen to e7, I play a3. Took me a while to come up with this move, and after some analysis I kind of realized that it's not the best move. So better would have been bishop to b2. Let's look at that line. If I play bishop to b2 and he takes with the queen on b4, you know, that's what I was afraid of. If he does that, it's not so bad. I play knight takes e5. He backs his queen back up to attack the knight, push the pawn forward. And white has a great position here. You know, moving that pawn forward is not at all weakening. Like, how's black really going to attack that e3 pawn, the backwards pawn? The bishop's trapped away for a long time. If a rook comes to the e-file, it doesn't really matter. My knight's blocking it here with the pawn defending it and the bishop. So I can maintain control of this e5 square. And so it's really hard for black to attack e3. So I think when you can play f4, it's fine. Actually, I just played a3. No, and I just played a3, which isn't a mistake, but it's just not the sharpest way to play for white. And then he plays rook to d8, and that was a good move. I played queen to e2 here. Possible would have been queen to c2. Probably would have been objectively better, but I like queen to e2. It gains control of this amazing f1 to a6 diagonal, and I say amazing because it keeps this knight out of the game. He plays bishop g4, which is by far the best move, and this gives me a problem here. I'm having some issues, because if he takes and I take with the queen, so I played h3 here, encouraging that, then he has rook to d3. So better would have been, after bishop takes, g takes would be better, and that wouldn't have been so bad. That would be necessary to keep that rook away, but I just take the bishop. And sadly enough, that allows for the rook to come to d3. My opponent jumps on that opportunity, and that's trouble for me because it hits my weak knight here. And eventually he can push his pawn forward, you know, opening up more pressure on this diagonal, attacking the rook and the knight. I just play my bishop to b2, and that's really the only move. But white still has some issues with protecting b2 now. So black pushes the pawn forward, and that was a mistake. Better would have just been to play the rook to d2. Then I would have had to play something like, you know, rook on a to b1 defending. Then he could play the pawn forward, and after my queen moves, you know, my queen has nowhere as productive to be. Let's say queen to f4. Knight over, attacking the queen. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes queen. Knight takes queen. And then I lose a piece. Okay? So that's somewhat of a complicated, sharp variation, but it's instructive to know why that move had to be played. So after rook here, bishop here, pawn there was a mistake. Once again, the right idea was rook to d2, putting pressure on the bishop. And so when he plays pawn forward, I can move my queen back here, doing what I wanted her to do, which is maintain pressure on this diagonal and defend d2. And my opponent plays his rook over to d8, wanting to get that rook back on d2. And I play rook on a to d1. The only logical move, really, keeping the rook out of d2 and getting the pressure off of my d-file. And black plays queen over. Now this is an interesting kind of mistake. It should waste a tempo, actually, because after bishop c2, the rook has to move. And now if the rook goes to d2, which my opponent thought he could do, that's actually a mistake. So can you guys see the continuation from this point? A neat little tactic. I played the correct move. I played rook takes d2. And then black, of course, wants to take with the queen. And it looks like black's okay. But then white has rook to d1. And because of the knight on c3, black's unable to do anything. For example, queen takes queen. Rook can take rook with check. And then black has to passively defend, you know? And then white just takes the queen and he's up a piece. Black could have retreated passively to d6. He's going to be dropping e4. And his play is not justified. So best would be rook takes on d1. That's really what black had to play. And then admit his mistake by moving his queen back. And white would be able to clear up all that pressure by taking the rook, getting the pawn. White can either take the knight or the bishop. You know, that was the way to play for black. I mean, it wouldn't have been winning or anything, but he has to play for equality. So after I played rook to d1, my opponent resigned. If he played queen takes e2 once again. Oh, and check out the logo I designed for my business. I don't want to talk too much about that because I haven't planned everything out yet. So, you know, just a little sneak preview. And thanks, guys, for your attention.